Okay, so we're going to graph quadratics when they're in factored form and identify all the key features. So the first is the x-intercepts, and again, that's where the graph crosses the x-axis. The y value is 0, so on the x-axis, y equals 0. The y-intercepts then are where the graph crosses the y-axis, then the x value is 0. Then the a value is the GCF, the value that determines the stretch or the shrink of the graph. Any questions over that? Okay, so let's graph this. Okay, so here's our equation. F of x equals the quantity of x minus 3 times the quantity of x plus 1. The first thing we need to identify are the x-intercepts. That's the first thing we're going to look at. That's our step 1. So again, x-intercepts are where y is 0. So we're going to plug in 0 for y, or f of x. So f of x is going to equal 0. We substitute that in. So we have 0 equals x minus 3 times x plus 1. If I have an equation that equals 0, that tells me that one of those factors has to be 0. So x minus 3 will have to equal 0, or x plus 1 will have to equal 0 in order to get 0. Or they both can equal 0. So then you just solve for x on this. We're going to add 3 to both sides. That gives me x equals 3. So my first intercept is 3 for x and 0 for y. Do the same thing with the x plus 1 equaling 0. I subtract 1 from both sides, and I get x equals negative 1. So my other x-intercept is negative 1 and 0. Now we're going to graph that. So I'm going to go where x is 3 and y is 0, which is right here. And I'm going to go where x is negative 1 and y is 0 right here. Those are my x-intercepts. Okay, next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to find that a value. The a value is the number in front of the parentheses. Is there a number in front of that parenthesis? Okay. What number would that be then? 1. So the a value is 1. It is a positive 1, so that tells me my parabola faces up. Because when a is positive, the parabola faces up. If the a value is negative, then it reflects across the x-axis and it faces down. That also tells me Is my vertex, you guys, going to be the maximum point then, or is it going to be the minimum point there? Okay, so let's review. My vertex is going to be down here, right? Is that this lowest point or the highest point? The lowest, so it's a minimum. Okay. So that's step 2. Step 3 now is find the axis of symmetry. Remember, the axis of symmetry divides my parabola in half. So it is in the middle. Got the right small. It's in the middle of the x-intercepts. So what number is in the middle of -1 and 3? 1. So here is my my axis of symmetry. So my axis of symmetry is at x equals 1. Okay, so now we're going to go to step 4, which is my vertex. I already have part of my vertex because the axis of symmetry goes through my vertex. So that 1, the x value of my vertex comes from my axis of symmetry. Okay, now to find the y value, I need to use my patterned rate of change. Does anyone remember what pattern that parabola's change at? Very good. A over 1, 3a over 1, 5a over 1. Okay, so we're going to use that. A over 1, 3a over 1, and 5a over 1. You need to determine how far away my x-intercepts are from the axis of symmetry. How far away am I? 2, I'm 2 away. We're going to work backwards. With 2 steps. Okay. We're going to work backwards with those 2 steps. So that means I just need these 2 steps because that's the first 2. Does that make sense? Okay. So I'm going to work backwards using 3a over 1 and a over 1. So when I was graphing with a vertex, I would go up 1 over 1, right? Then up 3 over 1. So how would I go backwards? Down 3 over 1, then down 1 over 1. Does that make sense? So I'm going to go down 3 over 1. Then from here, from my x-intercepts, I'm going to go down 1, 2, 3, and over 1. Down 1, 2, 3, and over 1. I'm going to again go down 1 over 1, left and right. So I'm going to go down 1, and over 1. And now I have my vertex. And I also have my parabola that I can graph. So here is my vertex. It is at 1 and negative 4. Okay. Can anyone identify my y-intercept? Where does it cross the y-axis? Very good. Right here at 0 for x and negative 3 for y. And then we're going to describe our transformations. So my a value was 1, so I'm not stretching or shrinking at all. It's positive, so I'm not reflecting. My vertex is at 1, so that does tell me I moved to the right 1. And my y value is at negative 4, so that tells me that I moved down 4. Any questions over that? Okay, let's move on to the next one. Okay, Stephen, what's my first step? What am I going to look to do first? Very good. Step 1, x-intercepts. Let me see what color I used. For x-intercepts with blue. Let's get blue. Okay, so remember to find the x-intercepts, we're going to take our factors and set them equal to 0. So here's 2 equaling 0. We have x minus 1 equaling 0, and x minus 5 equals 0. Because the x-intercepts are where y equals 0. So we just plug in 0 for y, or f of x in this case, and solve. Now, is 2 ever going to be 0? Okay, not in my world. 2 does not equal 0 ever. I'd rather have $2 than $0, and no one's going to convince me that they are the same thing. Okay. X minus 1, I'm going to solve that and find out what x has to be. So I add 1 to both sides and get x equals 1. Here I add 5, and I get x equals 5. So my x-intercepts are 1 for x and 0 for y, and 5 for x and 0 for y. And now I'm going to graph that. I'm going to go where x is 1 and y is 0. I'm going to go where x is 5 and y is 0. And there we go. Okay, step 2 then is my a value. What do you guys think the a value is? Very good. My number in front here is 2. It is a positive 2. Oopsie. It is a positive 2. So my parabola faces up. Maddie, does that make my vertex a maximum or a minimum? It is a minimum because it's the lowest point on my graph. Okay, step 3, we're going to find the axis of symmetry. Again, that's the middle. So what number's in the middle here? 3. So our axis of symmetry is at x equals 3. That also makes my vertex 3 something. Okay. To find my vertex, I need to work backwards. I am 2 away. So my pattern is a over 1, then 3a over 1, then 5a over 1. Since my a value is 2, I'm going to plug that in. So I'm going to have 2 over 1, then 3 times 2 over 1. Give me 1 second. Okay. And then it would be 5 times 2 over 1. Okay. But since I'm only 2 steps away from that axis of symmetry, I only need to work backwards my first 2 steps. So I'm going to do 6 over 1. I'm going to go down 6 and then right and left 1. And then, so from this point, I'm going to go down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and over 1. So right, 1, 2, 3. Oops, I went down too far. So that's right here. Same thing over here, down 6 and over 1. Then I'm going to go down 2 and right and left 1. So from that point, I'm going to go down 2 and to the right 1, down 2 and to the right 1. And so this is my beautiful parabola. Any questions? Okay. Now it asks us for our step 4, which is going to be our y-intercepts. Or that's not step 4. This was step 4, sorry. So this is going to be step 5. Can I see my y-intercept? Do I see where it crosses? No, but I can figure it out because I can go up, right? I could use that last step. Go from my x-intercepts and go up 10 and over 1. So I'm going to go up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 and over 1. And that'll show me where my parabola is going to cross the y-axis. So it's going to be at 0 for x and 10 for y. Any questions over that? Okay, the transformations. When I didn't write down, my vertex would be at -8, right? So I have 3 and -8. I should have written that in. Is my vertex. So then our transformations. Can somebody tell me what are my transformations? Yep. Okay, very good. Since I have 2 for my a value, it is going to be a stretch, a vertical stretch.
one of your sixth grade students.
Okay, thank you. Okay, then I'm going to, what's another one? Sasha, what else am I going to be doing? Okay, you look at your vertex and which directions did I move for my vertex? Up how many? Okay, so the y value is -8. So what does that tell me? Is negative up or down? Down. And so I'm going to put down 8. So you just look at your vertex and describe how I get to the vertex, which is going down 8. Okay? And Lonnie, what did I get? What's the other one I'm missing? Very good. The 3 of my vertex tells me I moved to the right 3. Any questions over that? Okay, next one. Okay, first step, x-intercepts. Okay, everyone find the x-intercepts for me. Very good. So when you separate it, you have x plus 3 equaling 0. So you get x equals -3. So that's one of them. Does anyone think they got the other one? So we have to set -x equal to 0 as well. To solve for that, divided by -1, divided by -1. And I would get x equals 0. So 0, 0. Okay, that was the tricky one. So let's graph those. I'm going to go where x is -3. And y is 0, and then where x is 0, 0. Okay. My a value. Anyone have an idea of my a value? -1, very good. My a value is right here. It's -1. Since the a value is negative, that means my parabola reflects across the x-axis. It faces down. So does that make my vertex the max or the min? Maximum this time. It's the highest point on my graph. Okay, now we want to move on to our axis of symmetry, step 3. This is a little trickier. What's in between -3 and 0? Very good, -1.5. So it's kind of like right here. So it's x equals -1.5. See. Which means I can't work backwards for this because I'm always going to go down something and over 1. I'm never going to go down something and over 1/2. Okay, so I cannot work backwards. So I have to try something different. So for my vertex, we're going to move it down here. Okay, plug x equals -1.5 into, is it f of x or g of x? F of x. F of x equals negative x times x plus 3. Okay, so we're going to substitute that in. I know what x equals, and I'm going to find out what y equals then. So I'm going to have f times negative 1.5. So f of negative 1.5. Ooh, that was bad math on me. So f of negative 1.5 equals negative, when I plug a negative into a negative, makes this positive 1.5 times negative 1.5 plus 3. Now we do the math. Order of operations, parentheses. So negative 1.5 plus 3. Get my calculator. Okay, and that gives me 1.5, right? Then I'm going to multiply 1.5 times 1.5. Okay, and get f of 1.5 equals 2.25. Use a calculator if you're not sure. So my y value is 2.25. So that's another way to find the vertex if you've gotten the x value using the axis of symmetry. Okay, you can plug in the x value into the equation and solve for y if you can't see it on the graph. Okay, so we're going to try and graph that. I'm going to go where x is negative 1.5 and y is 2.25, which is right here. About, and I'm going to draw my graph. Any questions over that? Then it does ask for my x-intercept, or sorry, my y-intercept. And where does it cross the y-axis? At 0. So 0, 0 is also one of my y-intercept. Okay, does anyone have one of my transformations? Someone raise a hand and give me a transformation. Maddie? It's not shrinking. It's neither one of those because the a value is 1. The negative, what does the negative tell me? Okay. Reflects across the x-axis. Okay. So that a value is what tells me it's going to be reflecting across the x-axis. Something else? Someone raise their hand. How does it move? Up, down, right, or left? Okay, that x value is negative 1.5. So which direction does that go? Left 1.5. And then the y value is positive 2.25. So it goes up 2.25. Any questions over that? So again, for the transformations, use the vertex that we found. Okay, in your own words, I would like you guys to answer. Tell yourself how you're going to find those different things. You might start with G first. How did you find the x-intercepts? Because that's what we normally started with. Okay, just give yourself a little cheat sheet that reminds you how to do that. What did we do? Okay, can someone raise their hand and tell me how I'm going to find the x-intercepts? Okay, Chloe? Oh, is that how you found the axis symmetry? Okay. A different color. Okay. Then what about E? How did you find the vertex? There's two different ways we found that, right? You want to share what they wrote there? Okay, the first way we did it. What do we do? Work backwards, right? Using our A over 1, then 3A over 1, and 5A over 1. Identified how far away from, from the axis of symmetry. Okay, we did that, and then we used those steps in reverse. Does that make sense? Or step 2 was to plug the x equation and solve for y. Okay, I still need that. Okay. How do you find the y-intercept? Does anyone have an idea of how we find the y-intercepts? Okay, Blake, how do you find the y-intercept? Very good. Where it crosses the y-axis. Okay. There's another way too. Plug 0 in for x and simplify. if you plug 0 into x into the equation, then you can also find it. Because in your homework, a couple of times the y intercept is going to be off the graph. You're not going to be able to see it. So you have to plug in the 0 for x and find y. And our x-intercepts, how do we find those? What? Yes. Plug in 0 for y and solve. Okay, so that's all of it, how we'd write it out. Okay, next. So now in your homework, there's going to be a couple that we're going to have to factor. So in C, you have to factor first. And in D, it's in vertex form, so you just graph it. You can find, that's easy. That's the easy one. Okay. So let's do C first to make sure we know how to do that. So I'll get you started on C. So we have x squared plus 8x plus 15. So it multiplies to x squared, class. X times x. Okay. Nathan, what multiplies to 15? 3 and 5. So that will give me 3 times x is 3x. And x times 5 is 5x. If I add them, do I get 8? Yes. And everything's positive, so these are both positive. So now that I've rewritten it in factored form, it's going to be x plus 5 times x plus 3. Okay. We can identify then again our x-intercepts. So we have x plus 5 equaling 0 and x plus 3 equaling 0. So I subtract the 5, subtract the 3, get x equals negative 3. So we're going to go to negative 5 and negative 3. And I think you guys can go from there. Okay. Your homework